In the shadowed corridors of power, few queens have cast as terrifying a silhouette as the ruler who believed that her throne could only be secured through fire and blood. Imagine her standing atop a balcony overlooking the darkened moat surrounding her fortified castle, her eyes burning with a ruthless determination. The flickering flames from her torches cast jagged shadows across her face, revealing a countenance that was both regal and merciless. To her, power was not a gentle possession to be shared or negotiated. It was a throne to be claimed at any cost, even if that cost was eternal darkness. Her early years had shaped her into a woman forged in hardship and ambition. Raised amidst the turbulence of noble courts, she learned quickly that mercy was a luxury of weak rulers. From childhood, she had witnessed her family betrayed, their ambitions crumpled under the weight of rival factions and ruthless scheming. These lessons of treachery became the foundation of her ruthless rule. She grew into a woman who saw enemies not as opponents to be defeated, but as sacrifices to be extinguished, often with fire, symbolizing purgation, power, and ultimate control. Her desire for absolute dominance was fueled by her obsession with stability and her fear of losing her crown. When a rival noble, a charismatic yet dangerous man, began amassing support, she knew she needed to act swiftly. Her mind churned with dark strategies. Bribery was the first attempt, coffers of gold and promises of titles to sway allegiances. But words, she understood, could only buy time. Power required a demonstration of strength. When negotiations failed, she turned to her most feared weapon, the fiery execution. The scene was set in the depths of her court. Her trusted executioner prepared the pyres, and the condemned stood shackled, eyes wide with terror. Her own face remained calm, inscrutable, as she watched her enemies burn alive, rapacious flames consuming flesh that had once plotted her downfall. The screams echoed through the halls, but she was deaf to their pain, deaf to the chaos of chaos. For her, they were nothing but obstacles on her ascent, and flames were the only way to ensure they remained extinguished. But whispers and rumors soon spread beyond the sacred walls. Some claimed that her brutality was driven by madness, an unhinged obsession with control. Others argued that her ruthless methods were a necessary evil in a land rife with treachery. Witnesses swore that she hovered above the burning bodies, her face void of remorse, her eyes reflecting the flames, an angel of destruction cloaked in human guise. Her reputation as a monarch was cemented in darkness, her legend forged in the very flames she ordered. Yet, within her own court, a different narrative simmered, one of fear and admiration. She had seized power through fire, and she would continue to do so, no matter the cost. Years later, a historian excavating the chronicles of the era uncovered a hidden cache of documents, letters, eyewitness accounts, and burned relics that spoke of her cruelty. The evidence painted a stark picture. A woman who had turned her enemies into kindling, whose cruelty was not a sign of madness but of calculated strategy. The documents revealed the terror she inspired. Her enemies knew that crossing her meant not only exile or imprisonment, but being reduced to ash. Despite her ruthless tactics, her legacy was complex. Her brutality succeeded in suppressing uprising after uprising, but it also bred an atmosphere of paranoia. Trust was a rare commodity in her court. Propaganda veiled her as both a savior and a monster, sprinkling tales of her benevolence alongside stories of her cruelty. Her reign was a reflection of the paradox that defined many who wielded unfathomable power. The closer they held to the throne, the deeper their darkness grew. In the aftermath, historians pondered a vital question. Did her relentless fury preserve her kingdom or lead it to ruin? Was her burning of rivals a brutal necessity or an act of madness that doomed her rule? The truth, as often in history, lay hidden beneath layers of myth and memory. Yet, one thing was undeniable: her name became synonymous with fire, a fierce symbol of absolute authority. Power in flames was her signature, a testament to her belief that she alone could decide the fate of her realm, a fire that could both forge her empire and threaten to consume it entirely. In the end, her legend endures as a dark reflection of human ambition, an unquenchable desire that can only be satisfied through the destruction of anyone who dares oppose it. The late 15th and early 16th centuries were a time of relentless chaos and shifting allegiances across the European continent. In the heart of a turbulent realm, whether it was the fragile Duchy of Burgundy or a fictionalized kingdom inspired by the brutal quirks of history, power was a brittle thing, easily shattered by ambition, betrayal, and greed. The political landscape was a tapestry woven with fragile alliances, secret plots, and the constant threat of war. Nobles and monarchs alike navigated a treacherous maze where trust was scarce, and every handshake could be the prelude to treachery. At its core, this was an era defined by competing interests, powerful families vying to extend their influence, factions working behind the scenes to install a rival at the throne, and a royal court alive with whispers of betrayal. The very fabric of the monarchy was fragile, its stability hinging on alliances made and broken in the blink of an eye. A single misstep could mean disgrace, exile, or death, and often those consequences were sealed with cruelty and ruthlessness. Adding to this chaos was the vital role of succession. Claims to the throne were often disputed, sometimes with armed conflicts, sometimes through political marriages or secret schemes designed to weaken rivals. Women, too, played pivotal roles, either as pawns in the battle for power or as formidable players wielding influence behind the scenes. Queen Margaret of Savoy, for instance, if we consider her as a prototype, was a woman whose ambition matched her strategic cunning. She understood that holding power meant navigating a minefield of betrayal and betrayal's aftermath. In such a ruthless landscape, the question was not just who held the crown, but who could survive long enough to keep it. The environment was one where loyalty was fickle, and trust was often betrayed before it could even be forged. Nobles built alliances like sand castles, impressive but fragile, only to be swept away by the incoming tide of treachery. Secret plots festered under the veneer of courtly civility, with courtiers whispering conspiracies behind their hands, fearing they might be the next to fall. It was not uncommon for noble families to feud openly, for rival factions to stain the streets with blood, all while the monarch's court teetered on the edge of chaos. Power was a game played in shadows, each move calculated to solidify standing or undermine enemies. In this volatile atmosphere, the Queen's role was especially precarious. She was a product of noble ambition, raised amidst the intrigues of court life, trained to manipulate and betray as a means of survival. Her background was one of privilege, of course, but also of brutal necessity. To secure her dynasty, she had to be clever, ruthless, and unyielding. Any sign of weakness could be exploited, and she knew that her enemies, rival nobles hungry for her throne, watched her every move. The political tempests of the time also meant that alliances often shifted just as quickly as the wind changed direction. A loyal noble one day might be plotting treachery the next. The Queen herself was surrounded by a coterie of advisers, some loyal, some secretly aligned with her enemies. Trust was a rare commodity, and she knew too well that betrayal could come from those closest to her. The court was rife with whispered plots, clandestine meetings, and veiled threats, all simmering just beneath the surface of courtly decorum. Amid all this chaos, the Queen's ambition was clear. She desired to secure her position at any cost. She understood that the only way to maintain her hold on power was to eliminate every threat, whether through diplomacy, deception, or deadly force. The realm was a chessboard, and every noble, every rival, had to be carefully manipulated or neutralized before they could threaten her crown. In this brutal landscape, the political chaos was more than just a backdrop. It was the very engine that fueled her ruthless drive for dominance. It was a time when enemies could turn into allies overnight, if they saw advantage in doing so, and when betrayal could come cloaked in the guise of loyalty. For the Queen, navigating this storm required not just cunning but a heart cold enough to burn bridges and enemies when necessary. In the end, it was this turbulent realm, teetering on the brink of anarchy, that forged the Queen's reputation. Her ascent was marked by blood and deception, her reign shadowed by the relentless chaos she sought to tame. Yet even as she consolidated her power, the very chaos that had propelled her forward threatened to swallow her whole. In the dim corridors of power, the true players rarely stepped into the spotlight. Instead, they dwelled in the shadows, weaving a web of alliances and betrayal that kept the court teetering on the edge of chaos. Among these figures, some were trusted confidants, others covert rivals, each vying for their own piece of the fractured throne. It was within this labyrinth that the queen's fate was forged, where whispering secrets could mean life or death, and loyalty was a currency more fragile than a glass jewel. At the heart of it all stood the queen herself, a woman whose cunning and ruthlessness cast long shadows over her court. Ruthless, but calculating, her every move layered with deception. She knew that her rivals would not rest until her crown was severed from her head. Some sought to supplant her openly, their ambitions hidden behind false smiles and courtly gestures. Others whispered treason in hidden alcoves, conversing in hushed tones beneath flickering candlelight, their faces barely visible in the gloom. One such rival was Lord Alaric, a nobleman known for his charm and ambition. To the outside world, he appeared loyal, a trusted advisor. But beneath that veneer lurked a relentless hunger for the throne itself. His loyalty was a calculated act, an investment of power to be cashed in at the right moment. The queen was aware of his duplicity, but he had yet to overstep, until rumors began to swirl of a clandestine alliance with her enemies. She watched him carefully, planting seeds of doubt and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Meanwhile, the queen's closest confidant was a sly, silver-tongued advisor named Lucian. Known for his diplomatic finesse, Lucian was essential in forging alliances and suppressing dissent. Yet his loyalty was often ambiguous, his true motivations concealed behind layers of silvered words. Was he truly on her side? Or was he biding his time, waiting for the right opportunity to carve out a piece of power for himself? The queen trusted him, perhaps too much, only to suspect that he might be a silent predator, one who could turn at any moment. There was also the charismatic but dangerous noblewoman, Countess Elise, a rival disguised as an ally. She had her own designs on the throne, weaving her influence quietly among the courtiers. Her charm was a weapon, a velvet glove hiding an iron fist. She whispered sweet promises to the queen, gainsaid her enemies in secret, and sowed discord within her rivals' ranks. The queen understood that Elise's words could be poison and kept her close, wary of her deadly charms. Within this treacherous web, love and outright betrayal often blurred. Trusted courtiers, perhaps even some who seemed loyal, secretly plotted insurrection. Whispers of late-night meetings, secret letters stained with ink and blood, circulated behind the queen's back. Some of her most trusted aides, those she believed were loyal, proved to be double agents, passing information to rivals or sabotaging her plans. The court was filled with acts of deception. A nobleman offering false allegiance to gain favor, a trusted servant slipping a dangerous note into her chamber, or a confidant feigning loyalty while secretly arching for her downfall. The queen herself was no stranger to this duplicity. Her smiles concealed 1,000 plans, each sharper than the last. She was a master of reading faces, of sensing treachery lurking behind a well-practiced handshake. Yet, amid the swirling currents of loyalty and treachery, some figures dared to cross lines that could not be undone. Ambition sometimes drove even the most seemingly loyal into dangerous territory. The queen's enemies, cloaked in deception, plotted in shadows, their schemes sometimes unraveling only when their own secrets were exposed to flames or to her wrath. As the intrigues unfolded, the court became a battleground of whispers and subtle gestures, each one potentially sealing a life's fate. Alliances were forged with a handshake one day, broken with a dagger the next. The queen knew that trust was a fragile veneer. Behind it lay a sea of treachery waiting to drown the unwary. In this deadly dance, the line between friend and foe was razor thin. Every alliance had to be weighed carefully, every confidant scrutinized. Her enemies lurked everywhere, their plans hidden beneath layers of lies and whispered promises. Yet she wielded her own shadowy network, trusting only her keen instincts and ruthless strategy. Only by navigating these treacherous waters could she hope to keep her throne, even if it meant dancing on the knife's edge of betrayal and blood. In the end, it was these figures, the allies, rivals, and hidden enemies, who shaped her reign, their shadows stretching long over her dark, tumultuous rule. In the labyrinthine corridors of power, every whisper, every glance held the weight of life and death. The queen, perched on her throne of dominance, knew that her enemies plotted just beyond the shadowed curtains of the court. Rumors of rebellion, whispers of rival claims. These threats simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. To her, these dangers were not merely political skirmishes. They were existential challenges to her reign, and she would meet them with ruthlessness fitting of a ruler desperate to secure her legacy. Her first line of defense was often in diplomacy, bribery, threats, or strategic marriages designed to tie her enemies closer or wipe out their support. Yet, beneath her calculated veneer, a darker resolve grew. When these efforts failed or proved insufficient, she turned to darker measures that would leave no doubt of her brutality, her willingness to burn aside any obstacle. Her methods became ruthless, her heart hardened by the knowledge that in her world, mercy was a luxury few could afford and survive. The initial signs of rebellion appeared quietly. A dismissed noble seen whispering in secret chambers. A disgraced advisor spiraling into open hostility. A rival lord amassing forces under the cover of night. The Queen's spies reported these movements, feeding her the intelligence she needed to act swiftly. However, in her mind, swift action was more than tactical, it was existential. She understood that delays eased the enemy's advantage and that hesitation could invite chaos. As the threat grew, so did her resolve to neutralize her enemies permanently. She knew that some rivals lurked in the shadows, hidden behind loyal faces, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her approach was surgical. No longer content with exile or imprisonment, she resolved to eradicate the threat entirely. When a prominent noble or potential heir seemed too dangerous, the Queen resorted to the most brutal of measures. One night, under the cover of darkness, she summoned her guards. They marched her enemies into a chamber beneath the castle, an austere space lined with blackened stones and flickering torches. The Queen's expression was cold and unyielding, an image of icy resolve. She watched in silence as her servants arranged the condemned in a circle, bound and trembling, a tableau of her absolute authority. The flames were ignited, first in her mind, then literally engulfing the chamber. The court watched from above, hushed and tense, as the merciless punishment unfolded. The screams, the crackle of burning flesh, and the glow of flames reflected her unwavering countenance. She did not flinch. Instead, her eyes burned with a fierce determination that betrayed her cold exterior. To her, this was justice, a necessary act to purge her realm of treason and disloyalty. The inferno was not merely punishment, it was a calculated display of power, a warning to anyone daring to challenge her. Yet, beneath her resolve, whispers circulated among courtiers, some shocked, others whispering praise. Had she gone too far? Or was this cruelty merely the cost of stability in such a dangerous age? The Queen, in her relentless quest to tighten her grip, believed that only through fear could order be maintained. Her enemies' cries were drowned in the roar of flames, sealing their fate, but also sowing seeds of dread among her subjects and nobles alike. Her dark measures did not go unnoticed by future generations. Some saw her as a ruthless tyrant, others as a woman of unyielding strength who knew that her crown was her only true family. However, her methods cast long shadows, and her legacy became intertwined with the horrific scenes of her wrath. Every burned body, every scream of those she deemed a threat, carved her reputation into a legend, one that would last centuries as a reminder of the perilous boundary between order and chaos. In the aftermath, the court was subdued, silent in the wake of her blood-stained resolutions. Her enemies were gone, replaced by a fearful calm, yet beneath that silence lurked a pervasive paranoia. The Queen understood this, knew that her enemies could be replaced, but the scars of her actions would linger. Her enemies' blood had bought her temporary peace, but it also forged a darker, more formidable foe, the fear of her own shadow. With each victory, her grip tightened, but so too did the darkness within her grow. The confrontation had forged her anew, a ruler who wielded fire not just as a weapon, but as a symbol of her unassailable power. It was this dark resolve, rooted in her unrelenting will to survive and dominate, that defined her reign. In the shadowed depths of history, few tales evoke such visceral chills as the story of a queen whose ruthless methods left a trail of fire and ash in her wake. Secrets in the Ashes peels back the layers of legend to reveal the brutal realities behind her rise and her reign of terror. Beneath the veneer of regal dignity lay a woman willing to burn her rivals alive to secure her throne, an act so gruesome that her legacy becomes intertwined with smoke, screams, and unthinkable cruelty. Centuries later, investigators and historians uncover fragments of truth hidden within the charred remains of the past. Court records, long dismissed as mere embellishments, tell of whispered confessions and secret letters drowned in soot and silence. Artifacts, blackened blades, burned relics, charred manuscripts stand as silent witnesses to her ruthless deeds. These relics, carefully preserved in dusty archives, hold the scars of her brutality, echoing stories that have been buried under centuries of myth and denial. The most startling evidence comes from a series of clandestine documents discovered in a hidden vault beneath the old court records. Among faded parchment, a scribe's ink reveals attempts to cover up her sins, coded messages, desperate pleas for mercy, or perhaps simply the secret confession of a courtier who dared to speak after the flames died down. This phrase, etched into the margins of a burned ledger, underscores a calculated cruelty, an unflinching resolve to eliminate her enemies not by exile or imprisonment, but by fire and death. The Queen's method was not a spur-of-the-moment act of rage, but a calculated strategy to instill fear and maintain control. Witnesses recount scenes where she personally oversaw the executions, her gaze cold, her voice unwavering. Flames roared as her enemies, bound and desperate, were consumed alive. The crackle of burning flesh and screams filled the air, yet she remained impassive, unwavering. Her cruelty was brutal, but it was also political, every blaze a brutal reminder to those who dared oppose her that she wielded death as her weapon of choice. Some sources suggest a darker understanding. Perhaps her acts of brutality were not solely about power, but also rooted in a deep paranoia. Rumors swirl that she believed her enemies would forever plot her downfall, and that only their complete eradication could secure her future. As the flames consumed her rivals, her grip on power tightened, but at a terrible cost. The stories of her cruelty spread far beyond her court, shaping her legend as both a despotic monster and a guardian of stability, an ambiguous figure whose actions blurred the line between tyranny and necessity. In the process of uncovering the truth, modern historians are confronted with a troubling question. Was her brutality a product of her time's brutal customs, or was she uniquely savage? Medieval chronicles paint her as a ruler unafraid to dance with darkness, to burn her rivals to preserve her crown. Yet these accounts are often biased, both hagiographic and condemnatory. What remains undeniable is the chilling consistency, her willingness to see her enemies consumed by flames, her cold command over the inferno, and her unflinching resolve to exact destruction. As archaeological and documentary evidence continues to surface, a picture emerges of a ruler who used terror as her most potent weapon. Her reputation as a ruthless, merciless figure endures, her name whispered in fear and fascination. Long after her death, her legend persisted in stories told by those who survived her reign, and in the artistic depictions that survive, flames licking the skies, darkened relics bearing the scars of her brutality. Yet beneath the layers of horror lies a deeper reflection. Perhaps her acts were driven by a desire for order in chaos, a brutal attempt to prevent civil war, chaos, or mutiny. The moral question remains: did her fire-breathing brutality actually secure her realm, or did it sow the seeds of further unrest? Did her ruthlessness serve as a warning, or did it ultimately doom her legacy? The answers are buried beneath ash and myth, yet their echoes linger in every account, every artifact, and every shadowed corridor of her once glorious court. Ultimately, Secrets in the Ashes reveals a woman who mastered the art of burning her enemies alive, literally and figuratively, to hold on to power. Her story is a stark testament to the destructive allure of absolute authority and the dark depths to which a ruler may descend in pursuit of her throne. The aftermath of the Queen's brutal reign of fire left a shadow that would stretch far beyond her lifetime, seeping into the very fabric of her legacy. She had achieved her goal, dismantling her rivals through flames and terror, but at what cost? The consequences of her ruthless actions echoed through history, shaping her reputation, her land, and the future rulers who looked upon her as both a warning and a warning figure. In the immediate aftermath, her enemies were vanquished, their voices silenced in blackened graves. Power had been consolidated, her throne secured amidst the smouldering ruins of her enemies. Yet, beneath the veneer of her triumphant rule lay a pervasive atmosphere of fear and paranoia. The court, once a place of courtly intrigue and whispered alliances, now thrived on suspicion. No noble, no adviser, was entirely safe from the queen's wrath. The courtiers knew, a misplaced word, a suspicious glance, could lead to a swift end in the Inferno's embrace. This climate of terror was reinforced by the stories she propagated, tales of her unyielding strength, of enemies consumed by flames because they dared to challenge her authority. Propaganda images depicted her as a powerful, even divine, ruler, an authoritarian whose ruthlessness was necessary to maintain order. But beneath this veneer, whispered rumors of her cruelty and madness persisted. Some claimed her brutality was born of desperation, a desperate bid to cling to power in a fractured political landscape. Others saw her acts as pure evil, a woman so consumed by her desire for dominance that she had become a monster. The longer-term impact of her actions was profound and complex. Her cruelty inspired awe and fear in equal measure, furthering her reputation as a ruler who would sacrifice anything, even her morality, to sustain her throne. Future monarchs looked to her as a cautionary tale, an example of power corrupted to its extremes. Historians pondered whether her ruthless methods were justified by stability or whether they planted seeds of chaos that would eventually undermine her legacy. Interestingly, her story persisted as a dark legend, woven into the culture of her land. Some held her up as a symbol of unrelenting strength, a ruler who did what was necessary in a brutal world. Others saw her as the embodiment of tyranny, a monster whose brutality scarred her dynasty and the memory of her realm. Her legacy became a tangled web of admiration and horror, inspiring both fear and fascination among future generations. Yet it was perhaps her own paranoia and cruelty that sealed her downfall. Her unchecked violence sparked resentment among those who remained hidden in the shadows, waiting for their moment of revenge. The rumors of her cruelty eventually attracted the attention of dissenters who knew that too much fire, too much blood, could ignite rebellions. In the end, her ruthlessness sowed the seeds not only of her power, but also of her vulnerability. Her enemies could now use her own acts of fire against her. The moral ambiguity surrounding her reign continues to echo through history. Was she a victim of her brutal times, forced to resort to savage measures, or a ruthless tyrant who lost her humanity along the way? This question lingers, inviting debate among historians, scholars, and storytellers. Some argue that her violent methods were a reflection of her environment, a time when power was often maintained through cruelty. Others contend that her actions created a cycle of violence, where her brutality only bred further chaos and suffering. Ultimately, her legend endures because it embodies the timeless theme of human ambition's destructive potential. Her story is a mirror, warning us of what can happen when the pursuit of absolute power spirals into madness and destruction. The figure of the queen who burned her rivals alive remains a potent symbol of the dark side of leadership, a reminder that the fire which forges a crown can also consume it. Her legacy is a cautionary tale, etched into history as much by the flames she commanded as by the stories told in hushed whispers long after her death. Her memory is a reflection of the moral dilemmas faced by those in power. Does strength justify cruelty? Can ruthless measures secure a stable future, or do they sow the seeds of downfall? These questions continue to linger, as her story reminds us that the line between ruler and monster often blurs in the smoke of ambition. In the end, whether remembered as a tyrant or a survivor, the queen who burned her rivals leaves behind a haunting legacy. In the shadowed corridors of history, few stories resonate with the chilling weight of unchecked ambition and the fine line between brilliance and madness. As we examine the dark tale of the queen who ordered her rivals to be burned alive for power, it becomes clear that her story is not merely one of cruelty, but also a mirror reflecting the depths of human ambition and the corrosive nature of absolute power. Her ruthless actions, carried out behind closed doors and cloaked in smoke and flame, force us to confront a haunting question. Is such brutality a manifestation of madness or a calculated survival tactic born out of a brutal era? Power, especially in the perilous courts of medieval Europe, was a dangerous game, an intricate dance of alliances, betrayals, and bloodshed. The queen in our story understood this all too well. She knew that the preservation of her dynasty depended not only on political acumen, but also on crushing her enemies before they could strike back. Her decision to consign her rivals to unthinkable deaths was driven by a horrifying certainty that only through fear could stability be maintained. Yet beneath her icy veneer lay a mind haunted by paranoia, consumed by the relentless pursuit of control, a craving that blurred the lines between strength and insanity. Many historians debating her legacy wrestle with the moral ambiguity of her methods. Was she a victim of her brutal times, a creature shaped by a world where might made right? Or was she a monster, a tyrant so consumed with power that she willingly embraced the darkness? Her actions, the setting of enemies aflame, symbolize a desire to erase threats entirely, to leave no trace of opposition. It was a spectacle of terror designed not merely to eliminate rivals, but to serve as a stark warning for all who dared challenge her authority. These acts of cruelty broadcast a message. Her grip on power was absolute, unshakable, no matter the cost. Yet one cannot ignore the fact that her ruthless tactics achieved a certain form of stability, if only temporary. Her enemies were silenced, her rule strengthened, but at what expense? The fear she fostered permeated every level of the court, turning the once lively palace into a place of suspicion and dread. Rumors spread that her brutality was born of madness, yet others argued that it was cold pragmatism, a dark necessity. This duality lies at the heart of her story. How do we judge a ruler who secures peace through terror? Was her cruelty a sign of madness or a calculated strategy? And ultimately, did her brutal methods sow the seeds of her downfall? History often remembers her as a monster, a dark legend whispered in fearful tones. Artifacts unearthed centuries later, blackened relics, jarred documents, or even the lingering scent of smoke, testify to the terror she unleashed. But her story also prompts reflection on the human condition. Is such darkness inherent in the pursuit of power, or is it a symptom of a world driven by greed and survival? The moral ambiguity leaves us pondering whether her actions were a necessary evil or an unforgivable transgression. In the end, the reflection in darkness reveals a complex portrait, a woman driven by ambition, her soul marred by the flames she set to her rivals. Did her ruthless tactics truly secure her legacy, or did they carve her path into infamy? Perhaps her story serves as a cautionary tale, warning us of the destructive allure of absolute power, which can transform even the most rational into monsters. The darkness in her history reminds us that ambition, unchecked and fueled by fear, can spiral into madness, leaving behind a legacy stained with fire and blood. As we reconsider her story, we are left with uncomfortable questions about human nature. Is madness a mere consequence of power's intoxicating grip? Or is it a rational response to a ruthless world where only the strongest survive? The boundaries between sanity and insanity blur when survival hangs in the balance. Her story stands as a stark reminder that the pursuit of power can rapidly descend into chaos, where human ambition, cloaked in darkness, can unleash destruction not just on others, but on the soul itself. In contemplating her legacy, we are forced to confront our own aspirations and the shadows they cast. The allure of great power comes hand in hand with grave moral costs. Her story, dark, brutal, and haunting, challenges us to ask, are we truly different from her? Do the flames of ambition burn within us all? And in the end, perhaps the greatest lesson lies within the darkness itself, that human ambition, when untempered, can ignite fires that consume everything in their path, leaving behind only ashes and echoes of a past consumed by flames.